How could you? How could you, Robert Downey Jr., unfollow your MCU co-stars? How could you do that? Yeah, Robert Downey Jr. is getting a lot of flack for unfollowing some of his MCU co-stars on Instagram, not Twitter. The headlines would have you believe that he has just completely stopped following everybody associated with the MCU, and that is not the case. His Instagram account, he's pruned it down to 40 or so people that are not actors. None of them are actors. Maybe he doesn't want to get involved in the drama. Maybe he just doesn't want to get involved in the drama. Maybe he doesn't want to constantly read or be associated with some of the political stuff coming out of his co-stars' mouths, because a lot of his co-stars are weirdly political, and especially on Twitter. Especially on Twitter. Now, I don't know how often he checks his Twitter account, but it's interesting that this is actually making headline news because Robert Downey Jr., God forbid, is pruning his social media followers. Maybe Robert Downey Jr. is learning that social media is not the real world, is learning that the time spent on social media is often not productive. And for a guy like him, it's probably best used to just signal boost something that he's interested in promoting, which seems to be the case. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how Robert Downey Jr. Ripped cancel culture because he defended Chris Pratt last fall. Chris Pratt was getting blasted for not going to a Biden fundraiser. And Pratt was even like, I don't really care. I'm not really that political. I don't want to get into it. And people took it to mean that he was giving Donald Trump a glowing endorsement, which is, of course, a huge taboo in Hollywood. So they're like, well, he didn't go to the Biden fundraiser, so he must be a Trump guy. Kid logic, right? Never mind that Sarah Silverman literally got naked to promote Biden, and a couple months later walked it back and said, yeah, I can't really identify with the Democrats anymore. Not a Republican, but I'm definitely not a Democrat. That went down the memory hole. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Stephen Dorff. Stephen Dorff saying that it was embarrassing for Scarlett Johansson to be in the garbage movie The Black Widow. And I gotta wonder if the OG Phase 1 MCU stars aren't just kind of getting tired of it all and they're dipping out. Phase 4 isn't gonna look anything like Phase 1, 2, and 3. It sounds to me like it's gonna be a completely unrecognizable MCU going forward. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I don't think it's a very good thing at all, to be honest, but maybe it's just not for me. So thank you so much for the support, guys. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We're over 205,000 subs. Thank you. Geeky's not here, so there's no woohoo. I'll give you a woohoo. Woohoo! There we go. That's about as excited as I get. She's not here. She's running some errands. So she'll be back later today for some more videos. Let's talk about the first part of this, that Robert Downey Jr. is unfollowing his Marvel co-stars, and it sends fans into a tizzy. Again, they're not telling you until the very end of these articles that it's just Instagram, and it seems like he's pruning his Instagram to focus on this charity, this organization he's part of. Mr. Stark, we don't feel so good. Avengers star Robert Downey Jr. has unfollowed his fellow Marvel cast members on Instagram, including Tom Holland, along with his good friend Chris Evans, and it's got the internet blipping out. This also comes days before the release of Scarlett Johansson's first MCU standalone film, Black Widow. The social media sequel to the Avengers breakup went widely unnoticed over the holiday weekend, but more and more Iron Man and Tony Stark fans are beginning to express their shock. I wasn't ready for Robert Downey Jr. to unfollow the whole Marvel cast. It's like the end of an era. It is the end of an era. The MCU as we knew it as of Endgame is over. It literally was the end game for that part of the MCU. And as we're seeing going forward, things are going to be very, very different, to put it lightly. Things are going to be, I believe, quote unquote, woke. And things are going to be very, very convoluted with the multiverse and time travel and all this other stuff being introduced all of a sudden in outer space and Eternals, and it's gonna be a mess. I don't know how casuals are going to deal with it. I think a lot of people might know about. Yeah. Another fan demanded Robert Downey Jr. reunite with the cast. Follow Marvel's cast on Instagram now. Now you have to do what we say, Robert Downey Jr., because we're a stan. We're your biggest fans. Actually, it's not just MCU people he's split from. None of Downey's current 43 followers are even actors, prompting other theories unrelated to the possible bad blood. His Instagram bio is also a prompt to get involved with Footprint Coalition, an organization of environmental investors that Downey funded. So he's basically using Instagram to promote this charity, this organization. Despite the public freakout, Downey, who has last reprised his role of Iron Man in 2019's Endgame, still follows his former colleagues on Twitter. Maybe Thanos had one more trick up his sleeve, but this didn't seem inevitable. The post reached out to Downey's reps and is awaiting a comment. I don't think you're going to get a comment. I think he's basically using Instagram to promote his passion project at this point. But you know what? Downey has had a lot of run-ins with people on social media. He did defend Chris Pratt. He got a lot of blowback. And I think this was on his Instagram. I'm pretty sure this was on his Instagram. I know Pratt got blasted on Instagram, but here are some of the comments that he had to defend Chris Pratt from. Literally, WTF, he's a Trump supporter. Because he wouldn't go to the Biden fundraiser. He's inherently homophobic. He belongs to a church that's completely and radically conservative. And with this comment, you've lost my support. We cannot afford to prop up those that are voting for Trump. Did he ever say he was voting for Trump? I don't know if he ever said he was voting for Trump. Damn it, why are all rich people trash? All rich people, except the rich people we like, except Mark Ruffalo. Mark Ruffalo, who wants to redistribute wealth. So I'm sure he's going to be first in line to do that, right? He's going to give his millions away. Supporting this white supremacist, homophobic man, but doing nothing when Brie Larson was getting death threats. He didn't really work with her that much. When Don Cheadle and Zendaya were being attacked by racist trolls. You know who else was being attacked by racist trolls? Zoe Saldana for defending Chris Pratt. They called her all kinds of horrible things, all kinds of horrible names. They called her the N-word many times because she defended Chris Pratt. You're defending someone who's openly homophobic and who supports a man who is a fascist white supremacist. This is majorly disappointing. He's just as Christian as Trump and every other Republican can eat Shiite. Yeah, so if you take issue with Chris, I've got a novel idea, Robert Downey Jr. continued. Delete your social media accounts, sit with your own defects of character, work on them, then celebrate your humanness. Ruffalo, who would probably be polar opposite of Pratt in terms of his political beliefs, he defended him, saying he's as solid a man as there is. He's not overtly political. He's just not overtly political, but you're not allowed to be. Again, you have to signal. If you're in Hollywood current year, you have to make sure everybody knows you're on the right side of history. You have to constantly tell people what your politics are. You have to constantly tweet about it. You have to constantly make sure that all the psychos on Twitter, all the stans, know that you're a good person because you voted for the person they like. And it turns out at the end of the day, it's not indicative of the real world. The vast majority of people do not give a shit. They just want to know if the movie you're in is good. And now if you're like a horrible child diddler or something like that, then yeah, the public probably wants to know about it, and they will probably avoid you. But if you just happen to vote for somebody they don't like, or you don't get as political as Hollywood thinks you should be getting, that is a Hollywood thing. That is a Twitter thing. That's a social media thing. The rest of the world does not care. They don't care. They really don't. So yeah, I actually agree with Robert Downey Jr. I think, just talk about things you want to talk about. You're a multi-millionaire at this point, and just be like, you know what? You don't like what I have to say? Piss off. Don't follow me. Whatever. I'm going to talk about this environmental thing I'm doing. That's saving the planet, to me, is more important than fighting with you on Instagram. Imagine that. So yeah, I would probably do it too. I'd be like, you know what? If it's going to be all politics 24/7, I don't give a shit. And they do. They look at what they do on Twitter, especially. They look at who you follow. They go through your follows. They look at who you follow. So what's Downey Jr. doing? He's like, well, I'm not following any actors, so you can't say I'm choosing any one person over somebody else because I'm not going to follow any actors. I'm just going to talk about the things I want to talk about. And I'm not going to, spend all my time slapping idiots down on Twitter. Speaking of drama, let's talk about Stephen Dorff saying he's embarrassed for Scarlett Johansson for appearing in the garbage Black Widow movie. Stephen Dorff, best known, I believe, to most people for playing the villain in Blade. I think he was also in The Gate, wasn't he, when he was a kid, where he got like an eyeball on his hand? Spoiler. That movie freaked me out when I was a kid. Freaked Geeky out too. So yeah, this is coming from The Independent. Stephen Dorff told The Independent, or Insider rather, Stephen Dorff told The Independent he did not want to be in movies like Black Widow. He wants to do his own thing. He's going to be in some MMA movie. He said the film looked like a bad video game. Black Widow is the first Marvel film with Scarlett Johansson as the lead, and it's probably going to be the last Marvel movie with Scarlett Johansson as the lead because they offed Natasha in Endgame and they didn't even give her a funeral. Dorff told The Independent that he's embarrassed for Scarlett Johansson for starring in the new Black Widow movie from Marvel. Johansson is reprising her role as a titular character for the next blockbuster. This is the first movie to be focused mainly on Johansson's character after she appeared in 7 films. Dorff is known for his roles in True Detective and Blade. He stars as a controversial MMA fighter in his latest movie, Embattled, and told The Independent in an interview that he would still hunt out the good shit because I don't want to be in Black Widow. It looks like garbage to me. It looks like a bad video game. I'm embarrassed for those people. I'm embarrassed for Scarlett. I'm sure she got paid $5-7 million bucks, but I'm embarrassed for her. I don't want to be in those movies. I really don't. I'll find that kid director that's going to be the next Kubrick, and I'll act for him instead. Yeah, Dorff is always picking these art house films, isn't he? I mean, he's just. I mean, some actors just aren't into the Hollywood thing. They pick the indie films. Dorff is not the only person to criticize superhero films. The renowned director Martin Scorsese previously branded Marvel films as theme parks rather than cinema. He's really not wrong. I mean, a lot of people were pissed off at Scorsese, but he really wasn't wrong because that's literally what Disney thinks about when they make these movies. I'm not saying they're terrible movies. I like the first couple of phases of the MCU for what they were, but Disney is looking at this like, how can we make this a ride? For sure. So yeah, this is interesting. I personally just think that Downey is just dipping out. I think a lot of the OG MCU cast are going to step away or step back from this franchise. I mean, hell, Jeremy Renner is being canceled by the girl they hired to play Snow White. She's talking about what a transphobic piece of trash Jeremy Renner is. I guarantee you once he's done with Hawkeye, he's probably done. He's probably out. A lot of these people are going to step back. We don't know what the hell's going on with Brie Larson either. The only one that's going to stay in is Hemsworth. And Geeky and I were talking about this because he is perfectly content. You look at some of the movies he's done in the last couple of years, Ghostbusters 2016, Men in Black International. He is perfectly content to be second fiddle to get work. Like, he doesn't have to be the leading man. He's totally fine being a joke in a female-led movie. And he's done this on a couple of different occasions now, and that's probably what Love and Thunder is going to wind up being too. If we're being completely honest. So, I don't know, guys. It's so weird. This is where we're at. It's all about who you follow. Virtue signaling. Make sure you follow the right people. Make sure you retweet, like and retweet all the right things until we decide it's your turn to get canceled. I'm going to wrap this one up. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, and we'll talk later.